The first sound I heard was not the slap of the screen door. It was the silence. Every conversation stopped at the exact same moment. More than 200 people had gathered for church that Sunday morning, yet when I stepped into the room carrying a basket of fresh bread, every pair of eyes turned toward me. No one spoke. No one smiled. Even the children stopped whispering. I looked down at myself. My dress was clean. My prayer covering was tied neatly beneath my chin. The bread was still warm. Nothing seemed wrong. Then Bishop Eli slowly stood from the front bench. He did not raise his voice. He did not look angry. He simply said, "Sister, please come with me." My hands suddenly felt too weak to hold the basket. I had absolutely no idea what I had done. By sunset that same day, everyone in our district would know my name. Not because I had committed some terrible sin, not because I had broken my marriage vows, not because I had hurt anyone. It happened because I forgot one Amish rule. One simple rule. A rule I had followed my entire life. The strange part was this. I did not even realize I had forgotten it. And by the time someone finally explained it to me, the damage had already been done. Before I tell you what happened that Sunday, you need to understand the kind of person I was. My name is Clara Hostettler. I was 22 years old. I had been married for only 11 months. My husband, Noah Graber, often joked that I worried too much. He was probably right. If a pie crust cracked, I started over. If a quilt stitch looked uneven, I pulled out the thread and sewed it again. I wanted everything to be right. Not because anyone forced me, because I believed careful work honored God. Noah used to laugh softly and say, "Clara, perfection is a heavy basket to carry." I always smiled. I can carry it. Looking back, I wish I had listened to him. We lived on a small farm just outside Millersburg, Ohio. Nothing about our life was unusual. We milked cows before sunrise, shared supper with Noah's parents every Wednesday, visited my family every other Saturday. Church rotated from one farmhouse to another every second Sunday. Life followed a rhythm so familiar that most days blended together. Until one Thursday afternoon. That afternoon, Noah's mother asked if I would help prepare food for the coming church service. Of course, I agreed. Nearly every woman in our district helped whenever church was hosted nearby. For 3 days, we baked bread, cooked chicken, prepared noodles, filled jars with applesauce. Everything had to be ready before sunrise Sunday morning. Saturday evening became busier than anyone expected. One family's horse became sick. Another family arrived late with extra benches. Rain soaked the wagon carrying several baskets of food. Everyone rushed from one task to another. By the time we finished, I could barely keep my eyes open. When Noah and I finally climbed into bed, he smiled. "You've worked enough for 3 people. I just want everything ready." He laughed quietly. "It already is." I believed him. I closed my eyes, and within seconds, I was asleep. The next morning, I woke later than usual. Sunlight was already shining through the curtains. I sat straight up. "Noah!" He was already pulling on his coat. "We're late." Panic rushed through me. I hurried downstairs, grabbed the bread basket, straightened my dress, tied my apron. Then we climbed into the buggy. The entire ride, I kept apologizing. "I should have checked the clock. I should have prepared everything earlier." "I should have," Noah gently interrupted. "Clara." I looked at him. "Breathe. We're only a few minutes late." I nodded, but my heart refused to slow down. When we arrived, buggies already lined both sides of the lane. Families were walking toward the house. Children were laughing outside. Nothing seemed unusual. I hurried toward the kitchen carrying the bread. Several women smiled as I entered. One of them reached for the basket. "We're glad you made it." "I'm sorry we're late." She smiled. "It happens." Those words comforted me, at least for a little while. Then church began. The ministers entered. Everyone found their seats. I slipped quietly onto the women's bench beside Noah's mother. She gave me a quick smile. Everything seemed normal, until halfway through the first hymn. I noticed something. Women sitting nearby kept glancing toward me, not once, again and again. One elderly woman looked surprised, another looked confused. A younger girl quickly looked away the moment our eyes met. My stomach tightened. Had I spilled flour on my dress? Was my prayer covering crooked? I gently touched my shoulder. Everything felt normal. Still, people continued looking. The longer the service continued, the more uncomfortable I became. When the final hymn ended, Bishop Eli slowly stood. Instead of dismissing everyone for the meal, he quietly said, "Sister Clara." Every head turned toward me. "Would you please come with me for a moment?" I stood so quickly the bench creaked beneath me. My hands were trembling. I looked toward Noah. He seemed just as confused as I was. As I followed the bishop into the small room beside the kitchen, only one question kept repeating inside my mind. What Amish rule had I forgotten, without even knowing I had forgotten it? Bishop Eli closed the door behind us. The small room was barely large enough for 3 people. A wooden table stood beside the window. An oil lamp rested on top of it, though it was no longer needed because the morning sun filled the room. He did not speak right away. Neither did I. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it. Finally, he looked at me with gentle eyes. "Clara." "Yes, Bishop." "Are you feeling well today?" His question surprised me. "I think so." "You do not feel sick?" "No." He nodded slowly. Then he asked something even stranger. "When you left home this morning, did you notice anything different?" I searched my memory. The bread, the buggy, the rain from the night before, sleeping later than usual. "I don't think so." He remained quiet for a few seconds. Then he walked closer. "Sister Clara, look at your dress." I looked down. Nothing. The fabric was clean. No stain, no tear. My apron was tied correctly. I looked back at him. "I don't understand." He pointed gently toward my head. "Your prayer covering." My hand immediately reached for it. It was still there, properly pinned, exactly where it should have been. I felt even more confused. "Is something wrong with it?" He smiled kindly. "The covering is not the problem." I waited. "You placed it on..." He paused, giving me another chance to notice. Then I looked more carefully. My breath caught. The tiny black strings that should have been tucked neatly inside were hanging outside my dress. I stared at them. Only 2 thin strings, hardly noticeable, yet suddenly they felt enormous. My face became hot. "I'm so sorry. I forgot." He nodded. "I believe you did." Tears immediately filled my eyes. "I never meant any disrespect." "I know." "I was rushing." "I overslept." "I wasn't thinking." He gently raised his hand. "I know." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I whispered, "Is that why everyone was looking at me?" He answered honestly, "Yes." I covered my face. "I embarrassed Noah." "No." "I embarrassed our family." Again, he gently shook his head. "You made a mistake." "They are not always the same thing." Those words slowed my breathing. Then he continued, "Our community notices small things because our traditions remind us to slow down." He smiled softly. "But sometimes, people become so busy looking at the mistake, they forget the person." His kindness surprised me. I had expected anger. Instead, he spoke with compassion. "You may fix your covering." I quickly tucked the loose strings inside and adjusted the pins. "There." He nodded. "Much better." I thought we were finished. Instead, he quietly added, "There is something I want you to remember." I waited. Humility is not proven by never making mistakes. It is shown by how we respond after we make them. His words settled deep inside my heart. When we returned to the main room, everyone was already preparing the meal. I expected whispers, judging looks, embarrassment. Instead, most people smiled warmly. Several older women greeted me exactly as they always had. One of them quietly squeezed my hand. "It's all right." Another laughed softly. I once forgot my apron completely. The women around her smiled. Then another admitted, "I wore 2 different shoes to church when I was newly married." Everyone laughed, including me. The heavy fear I had carried for the last hour slowly disappeared. Maybe this would all be forgotten. I hoped so. But I was wrong. The real lesson did not begin inside the church house. It began the following morning. Monday was wash day. I carried wet clothes to the line behind our house. As I pinned Noah's work shirts into the morning breeze, I heard wagon wheels stopping near the lane. 2 young Amish women climbed down. They smiled politely, but something felt different. After a few moments of small talk, one of them quietly asked, "Clara, were you really called into the bishop's room yesterday?" "Yes." "What happened?" I explained exactly what had happened. It was only my prayer covering. They looked at one another. Then one of them laughed nervously. "We heard something very different." My stomach tightened. "What did you hear?" She hesitated. "We heard you had been publicly corrected." The other woman quickly added, "And someone said you had broken a church rule on purpose." I stood completely still. That's not true. I know. But people were talking. After they left, I remained standing beside the clothesline. The wind moved gently through the white sheets. My mistake had lasted only a few seconds. The story about my mistake had already begun growing. That evening I told Noah everything. He listened quietly. When I finished, he smiled. "Do you know what my grandfather used to say?" I shook my head. He said, "A mistake travels through a community on foot." I looked confused. He continued smiling. "But gossip rides a fast horse." For the first time since Sunday morning, I laughed. A real laugh. Then Noah became serious again. "You cannot control what people imagine." He reached for my hand. "But you can always control who you become afterward." I looked at him. He squeezed my hand gently. "And I still know exactly who you are." Those words meant more than he could ever know. Still, by Tuesday afternoon, I discovered that one forgotten Amish rule had started a conversation far bigger than either of us had imagined. And this time, it was no longer only about me. By Wednesday morning, I realized the story had traveled much farther than I had. I had barely finished feeding the chickens when my cousin, Elsie Kaufman, stopped her buggy outside our lane. She usually greeted me with a hug. That morning, she only smiled politely. "I was already coming this way," she said, "but..." She hesitated. "I also wanted to see how you were doing." I smiled. "I'm fine." She looked relieved. "I'm glad." Then she quietly admitted, "People have been talking." I laughed softly. "I've noticed." She looked embarrassed. "Some people believe you were publicly disciplined." I wasn't. I know. They think the bishop was angry. He wasn't. They think Noah was embarrassed. I smiled. He wasn't embarrassed either. She let out a long breath. "I thought none of it sounded like you." I invited her inside. We sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee between us. After a few minutes, I asked, "Why do people always believe the worst version of a story?" Elsie thought for a moment. "My grandmother used to say that people often fill silence with imagination." That sentence stayed with me. People fill silence with imagination. Maybe that was exactly what had happened. Nobody knew what Bishop Eli and I had talked about, so everyone invented their own ending. Later that afternoon, Noah returned from the mill carrying a sack of flour over one shoulder. The moment he walked through the door, he smiled. "You've been thinking again." I laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "You only wrinkle your forehead like that when something is bothering you." I told him about Elsie's visit, about the rumors, about how quickly the story had changed. When I finished, Noah quietly poured himself a cup of coffee. Then he looked at me. "Would hearing the truth from the bishop end the gossip?" "I think so." He smiled gently. I don't. Why? Because gossip doesn't survive on truth. It survives on excitement. His words surprised me. The truth is ordinary, he shrugged, but rumors are entertaining. I wanted to disagree. Instead, I remembered how different the stories had already become in only 3 days. The next Sunday, church was held at another family's farm. I almost dreaded going. Part of me wondered if everyone would still be whispering. The other part hoped they had already forgotten. When Noah and I arrived, several women greeted me exactly as they always had. Children ran around my skirt asking if I had brought honey cookies. For a few minutes, I relaxed. Maybe everything had returned to normal. Then something unexpected happened. Before the service began, Bishop Eli stood up. I would like to say something. The room became quiet. He smiled. Last Sunday, many of you noticed that I spoke privately with Sister Clara. I felt my face grow warm. He continued. I have since learned that several unnecessary stories have begun spreading through our district. Nobody moved. I would like to correct one thing. He looked toward me and smiled kindly. Sister Clara was never being disciplined. She simply needed a quiet reminder after an honest mistake. He paused. She responded with humility and grace. Then he looked around the room. I hope we all respond the same way the next time we make one. The room remained silent, not uncomfortable, thoughtful. Then the bishop added something I never expected. A church family is not measured by how quickly it notices mistakes. It is measured by how quickly it offers grace. I looked around the room. Several older women smiled. One elderly man slowly nodded. Even the young girl sitting near the back seemed relieved. After church, people approached me one after another, not to ask questions, to apologize. One woman quietly admitted, I repeated something before I knew the truth. Another said, I'm sorry if my words hurt you. I hugged each of them, because I realized something. Most of them had never wanted to be cruel. They had simply believed what they heard. That afternoon, while Noah and I rode home together, I leaned against his shoulder. You were right. About what? The truth is quieter than gossip. He smiled, but it lasts longer. I laughed softly. I think you're becoming wiser. He grinned. No. I'm just married to someone who teaches me every week. The road stretched ahead of us beneath a bright autumn sky. For the first time since that Sunday morning, I no longer felt embarrassed. I felt thankful, because one forgotten rule had taught me something much more important than perfect appearances. It had shown me the difference between being noticed and being truly known. Still, I had no idea that the biggest lesson of all was waiting for me at home that very evening. That evening, just as the sun disappeared behind the trees, someone knocked on our front door. I expected to see a neighbor. Instead, I found Bishop Eli standing there, alone. He smiled warmly. I hope I'm not interrupting supper. Not at all. I invited him inside. Noah looked just as surprised as I was. The bishop accepted a cup of coffee and sat quietly at our kitchen table. For a few minutes, we spoke about ordinary things. The weather, the corn harvest, a family whose barn roof had finally been repaired. Then the bishop looked at me. Clara, I owe you an apology. I stared at him. You do? He nodded. I handled last Sunday poorly. I quickly shook my head. No, Bishop. You were kind. I tried to be. He smiled gently. But kindness is not always enough. The room became quiet. I should have spoken to you before the service began. I should have prevented unnecessary attention. I thought asking you privately afterward would protect your dignity. He sighed softly. Instead, people created their own story. I had never imagined hearing words like that from him, not because he was proud, but because leaders rarely admitted when something could have been done differently. I smiled. I've already forgiven it. He nodded. Thank you. But I came here for another reason. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small folded paper on the table. It was old. The edges had become soft with age. "What is this?" He smiled. "My first mistake." I looked confused. "You kept it?" He laughed. "My wife insisted I should." I carefully unfolded it. It was a short note, written more than 30 years earlier. It described how a young minister had forgotten an important reading during his very first church service. At the bottom, someone had written, "Remember this day whenever another young person makes an honest mistake." I looked up. "You were that young minister?" He nodded. I wanted to disappear. I couldn't help smiling. I thought everyone would remember forever. And did they? He laughed. No. They forgot before I did. The three of us laughed together. Then the bishop became serious. "I've learned something over the years." He looked at me. "The mistakes we remember most are usually the ones everyone else has already forgotten." Those words settled deep inside me. After he left, Noah stood beside the window watching the bishop's buggy disappear down the lane. Then he turned toward me. "Feel better?" I smiled. "I think I do." Winter arrived a few weeks later. The fields became white. Smoke rose from every farmhouse chimney. Life slowed. One snowy afternoon, I was helping several young women prepare food for another church service. One of them, barely 19 years old, suddenly gasped. "Oh no!" Everyone looked toward her. She had accidentally dropped an entire bowl of fresh pie filling across the kitchen floor. She looked ready to cry. "I'm so sorry. I ruined everything." The other girls froze. Nobody knew what to say. Then I remembered that Sunday, the whispers, the fear, the embarrassment. I walked over, picked up another empty bowl, and smiled. "Good." She looked completely confused. "Good?" I nodded. "Now you'll always remember to hold the bowl with both hands." The room became quiet. Then everyone laughed, including her. Together we cleaned the floor, made another filling, finished every pie before sunset. No one mentioned it again. On the buggy ride home, Noah smiled at me. "You handled that exactly the way Bishop Eli handled you." I shook my head. "Not exactly." "How was it different?" "I didn't wait." He smiled. "No, you didn't." That was the lesson I almost missed. Grace is strongest when it arrives immediately, not after fear has already done its work. Years passed. Our family grew. Children filled our farmhouse, then grandchildren. Every now and then, someone would ask if I remembered the Sunday I forgot my prayer covering. I always smiled. Because the story had changed. People no longer remembered my mistake. They remembered what happened afterward. How the bishop spoke to the congregation. How neighbors apologized. How our community learned something together. One spring afternoon, my oldest granddaughter climbed onto my lap while I was sewing. "Grandma?" "Yes?" "Is it true you once made a mistake at church?" I laughed. "I certainly did." "Were you scared?" "Very." "What happened?" I laid my sewing aside. I learned something. "What?" I gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I learned that every person you meet is carrying a mistake they're hoping someone will forgive." She thought about that. Then she asked, "So, should we be kind first?" I smiled. "Always." Now, whenever I look back on that Sunday, I do not remember the loose strings on my prayer covering. I remember something far more important. I remember a leader willing to admit he could have done better. Neighbors willing to apologize. A husband who never once made me feel ashamed. And a mistake that quietly taught an entire community the value of compassion. If you've stayed with me until the end, I'd like to ask you something. Has one small mistake ever taught you a lesson you carried for the rest of your life? If it has, tell me in the comments. Someone reading your story may realize they don't have to be perfect. They only have to keep learning. Because the greatest lesson I ever learned was this: people rarely remember the mistake. They remember how you treated others after making it. And in the end, that is the part of our story that truly lasts.